on a quiet stretch of Long Island's southern shore. The sound of waves has long carried more than the rhythm of the ocean. For over a decade, whispers of mystery and unanswered questions have haunted the sands of Gilgo Beach. This was once a place where families gathered in the summer sun, where fishing boats came and went, and where the night breeze promised calm. But beginning in 2010, that image changed forever. What began with the disappearance of a young woman led to one of the most extensive and puzzling investigations New York had ever seen. Search teams combed through miles of dunes and marshland, uncovering a series of discoveries that would shock not only the local community, but the entire country. Each step closer to the truth seemed only to deepen the shadows. Who was responsible? Was it the work of one person, or something far more complex? For years, the case remained cold, a story spoken in hushed tones and covered in countless theories. It was a mystery that refused to fade, with investigators working tirelessly and families waiting for answers that never seemed to come. And then, more than a decade later, a sudden breakthrough brought the spotlight back to Long Island. A name, a face, and a dramatic arrest reignited the search for truth, while raising even more questions about the past and what really happened on that lonely stretch of coastline. This is not just the story of a criminal case. It is the story of a community changed, of relentless pursuit, and of how secrets buried beneath sand and sea can resurface when least expected. It was the early morning hours of May 1st, 2010, when a young woman named Shannan Gilbert placed a frantic call to 911. Shannan was 24 years old, working as an escort, and had arranged to meet a client in the private community of Oak Beach, just off the southern edge of Long Island. In the call, which lasted more than 20 minutes, Shannan's voice trembled as she told the dispatcher that someone was after her, that she feared for her life, and that she needed help. Those words would later echo through one of the most haunting investigations in New York's recent history. Shannan fled the client's house and ran through the quiet streets of Oak Beach, knocking on doors and pleading for assistance. Several neighbors reported seeing her, confused and terrified, before she disappeared into the dark marshland that bordered the neighborhood. By the time officers arrived, she was gone. Despite an immediate search, no trace of her could be found that night. For her family, it marked the beginning of a desperate journey for answers. For investigators, it was the first step down a path that would reveal far more than anyone could imagine. In the weeks that followed, the Suffolk County Police Department treated her case as a missing person investigation. Search teams returned to Oak Beach repeatedly, combing the thick reeds, the wetlands, and the surrounding dunes. But progress was slow, and the mystery deepened with every passing day. Shannan's disappearance might have remained a single, tragic case until the following winter. On December 11th, 2010, during yet another search effort for Shannan, an officer with a cadaver dog ventured into the brush along Ocean Parkway, a desolate stretch of road that runs parallel to Gilgo Beach. What he found was not Shannan, but the remains of another young woman. Within days, 3 more women were discovered in the same area, all within a quarter mile of one another. The quiet search for Shannan Gilbert had suddenly transformed into something much larger, a chilling revelation that multiple lives had been taken, and that the sands of Gilgo Beach were hiding secrets no one had been prepared to uncover. That single 911 call in May 2010 had not only marked the disappearance of Shannan Gilbert, it had unlocked the beginning of one of America's most infamous mysteries. The quiet search for Shannan Gilbert quickly escalated into something no one had expected. On the morning of December 11th, 2010, an officer with his canine partner walked the edge of Ocean Parkway, less than 3 miles from where Shannan had last been seen. Hidden among the tall grass and tangled brush, the dog alerted to something unusual. What investigators uncovered that day was the body of Melissa Bartholomew, a 24-year-old woman who had vanished in July 2009 after leaving her apartment in the Bronx. Only 2 days later, on December 13th, the search widened. Just a short distance away, officers found the remains of Maureen Brainard Barnes, who had disappeared in July 2007 after traveling from Connecticut to Manhattan for work. Her case had long baffled her family, but now the grim truth was beginning to emerge. That same day, investigators pressed further into the dunes and discovered 2 more victims. The first was Megan Waterman, just 22 years old, who had last been seen in 2010 leaving a hotel in Hauppauge, New York. Hours later, they found Amber Lynn Costello, a 27-year-old from North Babylon who had gone missing in September 2010. By December 15th, only 4 days after the first discovery, the picture was becoming clearer and darker. 4 young women, all found within a quarter-mile stretch along Gilgo Beach. Each of them had advertised escort services online, using similar websites, and each had vanished after arranging meetings with clients. The pattern was undeniable. Investigators began referring to them collectively as the Gilgo Four. The sudden realization that these disappearances were not isolated events but pieces of a larger puzzle shocked the public and reignited fear throughout Long Island. For the families of Melissa, Maureen, Megan, and Amber, the confirmation was devastating, but it also brought long-awaited answers to years of silence. Authorities now faced a chilling question. If 4 victims were found in such a small area, how many more could there be? The once peaceful dunes of Gilgo Beach had become the center of one of the largest crime scenes in New York's history. And what had started as the search for one missing woman was now unraveling into the pursuit of a predator who had been hiding in plain sight for years. The discoveries of December 2010 were only the beginning. As the new year dawned, investigators realized they were dealing with something far larger than anyone had imagined. In January 2011, the Suffolk County Police expanded their search area along Ocean Parkway, stretching several miles east and west of Gilgo Beach. What they began to uncover would turn the dunes and marshes into one of the largest outdoor crime scenes New York had ever seen. In March 2011, officers returned with cadaver dogs, helicopters, and specialized units. Just off the parkway near Jones Beach, they located partial remains that were later connected to Jessica Taylor, a 20-year-old woman who had vanished in July 2003. Part of her body had been found years earlier in Manorville, a wooded area farther east on Long Island. Now, more evidence tied her to the Gilgo case. Only weeks later, investigators unearthed additional remains, this time belonging to Valerie Mack, also known as Jane Doe 6. She had disappeared in 2000 at the age of 24. Like Jessica, parts of her remains had been discovered in Manorville years before. The new finds linked her firmly to the Gilgo Beach investigation, reinforcing the idea that the same hand might have been responsible across both locations. But the most heartbreaking discoveries came in April 2011. Search teams found the skeletal remains of an unidentified woman, often referred to as Jane Doe 3, along with the tiny bones of a toddler, later believed to be her child. Both were left in close proximity, suggesting a tragedy that reached beyond the other cases. Not far from them, the remains of another unidentified woman were found, known for years only as Peaches because of a distinctive tattoo. By mid-2011, the number of victims connected to the Gilgo Beach area had climbed to at least 10. Some identities were known, others remained mysterious, but the pattern was undeniable. What began as the search for one missing woman had now revealed a trail of lives cut short stretching back more than a decade. The sands of Long Island were no longer a place of leisure. They had become a graveyard, each discovery adding new layers of complexity to an already haunting puzzle. And with every new set of remains, the question grew louder: how long had this been happening? And how many more were still waiting to be found? For more than a year, the search for Shannan Gilbert haunted investigators, her family, and the entire Long Island community. It was her desperate 911 call in May 2010 that had first drawn police into the dunes and brush of Gilgo Beach, a call that ended with her vanishing into the night. Now, in the final weeks of 2011, the search reached a grim conclusion. On December 13, 2011, police announced they had discovered Shannan's remains in a marshy thicket less than half a mile from where she was last seen. The location was treacherous, a patch of swampland tangled with reeds and water channels, making it easy for someone to become trapped. Nearby, searchers also found her purse, cell phone, and pieces of clothing, scattered as if she had fled blindly into the dark. The announcement shook the case to its core. 4 months, Shannan's disappearance had been treated as the thread that unraveled the Gilgo Beach mystery, leading to the discovery of multiple other victims. Now, with her body finally found, the question became whether she belonged to the same story or whether her death was something separate, something unique. The official explanation came quickly. Medical examiners concluded that Shannan likely drowned after becoming disoriented in the marsh. Her frantic 911 call, they suggested, might have been the result of a mental health episode, compounded by fear and exhaustion. To authorities, it was a tragic accident, not evidence of homicide, but Shannan's family and many advocates rejected that conclusion outright. They pointed to her last phone call, where she told dispatchers someone was after her. They argued that the scattering of her belongings and the isolated spot where her body was found raised far more questions than answers. To them, the drowning theory was unconvincing, and they believed Shannan was yet another victim of foul play, silenced like the others whose remains had surfaced along Ocean Parkway. The debate over her death divided public opinion. Was Shannan Gilbert the 11th victim of the same predator who had haunted Long Island for over a decade? Or was her case a tragic but unrelated misfortune that accidentally led authorities to uncover the Gilgo Beach killings? In the cold winter of 2011, one chapter closed with the discovery of her body. Yet at the very same time, the mystery surrounding her and the haunting stretch of beach only deepened. By the start of 2012, Gilgo Beach had become more than just a crime scene. It was a symbol of unanswered questions, a place where fear, speculation, and frustration lived side by side. The discoveries of 2010 and 2011 had shaken Long Island to its core, but as the years passed, the momentum began to slow. Investigators still searched, families still pleaded, and journalists still dug for clues, but no breakthrough came. Despite the weight of public attention, the case slipped into the shadows. News outlets covered every anniversary. Documentaries retraced the timeline. Online forums filled with theories, some insisting there was a single predator behind all the deaths, others convinced that multiple killers had used the same stretch of coastline as their dumping ground. Yet each debate ended in the same silence: no arrests, no justice. Through these years, police remained tight-lipped, holding back much of what they knew. Detectives quietly chased leads, tested evidence, and re-examined old files. But to the public eye, the investigation appeared frozen, leaving families to endure a painful limbo. Each year that passed without answers felt like another layer of sand burying the truth deeper beneath Gilgo Beach. In 2016, a flicker of hope surfaced when attention turned to John Bitrolf, a convicted Long Island murderer serving time for the killings of two women in the 1990s. His known history and his proximity to the Gilgo Beach area raised chilling questions. Investigators dug into his background, searching for possible ties to the remains along Ocean Parkway. For a moment, it seemed as though the case might finally crack open. But as the months went by, no definitive link was ever proven. Bitrolf remained behind bars, but the Gilgo case stayed unsolved. From 2012 through 2019, the Gilgo Beach killings became a story that refused to fade. Each time it seemed destined to become another cold file buried in archives, the mystery found a way to resurface in headlines, in television specials, and in the restless hearts of those waiting for justice. The beach remained the same, windswept, lonely, and deceptively calm. But beneath its silence lingered an unshakable truth: whoever was responsible for those lives cut short had not yet been unmasked. And until that day came, Gilgo Beach would never truly be at peace. As the years dragged on and the Gilgo Beach case seemed destined to remain unsolved, a quiet shift began to take place in the early 2020s. Across the country, law enforcement agencies were making breakthroughs in cold cases once thought impossible to solve, thanks to advances in testing and forensic genealogy. Decades-old mysteries were being unraveled with tools that had not existed when the Gilgo victims were first discovered. For families who had waited so long, these new technologies rekindled a fragile but powerful hope. By 2020, whispers grew louder that these same methods might finally shed light on the tangled story of Gilgo Beach. Analysts revisited old evidence, hair strands, degraded samples, and partial profiles once considered unusable. What had been invisible to investigators in 2010 was no longer beyond reach. Piece by piece, the puzzle was reopened, armed with science that could trace even the faintest genetic breadcrumbs back to their source. Still, science alone could not carry the case. What the Gilgo investigation desperately needed was unity. For years, critics had pointed to divisions and missteps among local authorities, and families demanded a stronger, more coordinated effort. In early 2022, that call was finally answered. Suffolk County Police announced the formation of a new task force, one unlike any before. It pulled together resources from the local level, the New York State Police, and even the FBI. The message was clear: the Gilgo case was no longer just a cold file collecting dust, it was once again a top priority. This renewed focus gave the investigation new momentum. Detectives re-examined timelines, cross-checked old witness statements, and applied technology to evidence that had sat untouched for years. Slowly, patterns began to emerge. While investigators remained cautious, the sense that progress was finally being made rippled through the community. After more than a decade of silence, the case no longer felt stagnant, it felt alive again. From 2020 to 2022, the winds began to shift. What once looked like an endless shadow over Long Island now carried the faint glow of possibility. Families of the victims, long accustomed to disappointment, dared to believe that answers might finally be within reach. The stage was being set for a breakthrough, one that would change everything. By the summer of 2023, the Gilgo Beach case had loomed over Long Island for more than a decade. Families of the victims had waded through years of uncertainty. The community had lived with whispers of a killer among them, and investigators had chased countless dead ends. But on July 13, 2023, everything changed. In a dramatic announcement, police revealed the arrest of Rex Heuermann, a 59-year-old architect who lived in Massapequa Park, just a short drive from the haunting stretch of Ocean Parkway. To neighbors, Heuermann was an ordinary man, quiet, methodical, a professional with a suburban home. But to prosecutors, he was the prime suspect who had eluded justice for years. Authorities moved quickly, outlining a case built on a web of evidence, cell phone records, and witness testimony. Investigators said that DNA recovered from a pizza crust discarded by Heuermann matched genetic material found on one of the victims. Burner phone data, long suspected to have been used by the killer, was tied back to devices connected to him. Witness statements added further weight, placing him in proximity to the crimes. Heuermann was charged with the murders of Melissa Bartholomew, 2009, Megan Waterman, 2010, and Amber Costello, 2010, three of the women known collectively as the Gilgo Four. Prosecutors also indicated that he was a prime suspect in the death of Maureen Brainard Barnes, 2007. Though charges in that case were still pending at the time of his arrest, the news sent shockwaves across the country. For years, the Gilgo Beach killings had been the subject of speculation, documentaries, and endless theories. Now, a man stood in court, facing the weight of those accusations. Yet, the story was not over. In his first court appearances, Rex Heuermann pleaded not guilty, maintaining his innocence against all charges. To many, his arrest marked a turning point, the moment when a faceless mystery finally had a name and a face. But to others, it was just the beginning of a new chapter, one that would unfold in courtrooms, through evidence, testimony, and long-awaited answers. For the families of the victims, it was a moment of vindication mixed with pain. Justice was finally within sight, yet it had taken so long to arrive. And for the community of Long Island, the arrest proved what many had feared all along, that the shadow cast over Gilgo Beach had been closer to home than anyone had imagined. When Rex Heuermann was first arrested in July 2023, many wondered if that would be the end of the story, or if it was only the beginning. As prosecutors began laying out their case, the evidence that had taken more than a decade to assemble started to grow even stronger. And in the years that followed, the charges against him expanded in ways that stunned even those who had followed the case from the very beginning. In early 2024, prosecutors formally added charges linking Heuermann to the death of Maureen Brainard Barnes, who had vanished in 2007 and whose remains were found alongside the other three women known as the Gilgo Four. This move solidified the prosecution's claim that Heuermann was not just connected to part of the mystery, he was the man behind the entire cluster of victims that had haunted investigators since the start. For families and investigators, it was a critical step toward bringing the full story into focus. But the developments did not stop there. By 2025, the case took another dramatic turn. New DNA testing using technology far more advanced than what was available in 2010 linked Heuermann to cases stretching back even further in time. Prosecutors announced additional charges connecting him to murders from 1993 and 2003, pushing the timeline of his alleged crimes back decades. Suddenly, the Gilgo Beach investigation was no longer limited to the 2000s. It had opened a window into a chilling possibility that Heuermann's actions spanned generations. According to court filings, the evidence came from hair samples recovered at crime scenes, preserved for years but only recently yielding results under modern forensic techniques. Digital records, including old phone data and internet activity, were also brought forward, creating a trail that prosecutors argue ties him directly to victims who had been missing for decades. The picture being painted was not of isolated crimes, but of a long and calculated pattern. For the families, these announcements brought a bittersweet mix of relief and sorrow. Each new indictment meant another victim's story was being acknowledged, another piece of the puzzle uncovered. But it also meant facing the depth of the tragedy that the shadow of Gilgo Beach may have stretched farther and longer than anyone first realized. By 2025, the case against Rex Heuermann had grown larger than anyone expected. What began as the search for one missing woman had evolved into a sweeping, decade-spanning investigation, one that continues to test the limits of justice, patience, and truth. By 2024, the case against Rex Heuermann had grown into one of the most closely watched trials in America. With new indictments stretching across decades and a mountain of forensic and digital evidence presented by prosecutors, the legal fight moved into the courtroom. But even before a jury could be seated, the battle lines were drawn. Heuermann's defense team launched a series of motions, challenging the validity of the evidence. They questioned the reliability of forensic genealogy, argued that some of the hair samples might have been contaminated, and pressed the court to exclude certain digital records they claimed were incomplete or misleading. Their strategy was clear: weaken the chain of evidence piece by piece, and cast doubt on the methods investigators had relied on. Meanwhile, prosecutors pushed back with equal determination. They argued that the DNA, burner phone data, and digital footprints formed a consistent and undeniable pattern, linking Heuermann to victims across multiple decades. To strengthen their case, they sought to bring all charges under a consolidated trial, telling the court that the crimes were not isolated, but part of a broader, connected series. In late 2024, a pivotal ruling was handed down. Judges determined that the various charges spanning from the early 1990s to the late 2000s would indeed be tried together. The decision marked a significant victory for the prosecution, ensuring that the jury would hear the full scope of the case, rather than fragmented pieces. For the families of the victims, it was a moment of validation. After years of waiting, their loved ones' stories would finally be heard side by side in a single trial. As legal arguments played out in court, the case continued to capture national attention. Documentaries revisited the timeline, reporters filled the courthouse steps, and the public followed every new development. In Long Island, the community remained divided, some stunned that a seemingly ordinary neighbor could be accused of such crimes, others angry it had taken so long for justice to arrive. For the families, the perpetrators battles were both exhausting and necessary. Each hearing brought them closer to the truth, yet reminded them of how far they had come since those first frantic days in 2010. By 2025, one thing was certain: the trial of Rex Heuermann would not only determine the fate of one man, but would also shape the legacy of one of America's most haunting mysteries. As the legal battles intensify and the name Rex Heuermann echoes through courtrooms and headlines, one reality remains: the Gilgo Beach case is far from fully resolved. Even with indictments stretching from the 1990s into the 2000s, key questions continue to haunt investigators, families, and the public alike. The most pressing is also the most unsettling. Was Heuermann responsible for all the bodies found along Ocean Parkway, or only a portion of them? From 2010 through 2011, investigators uncovered at least 10 sets of remains. While prosecutors have built their strongest case around the Gilgo Four and several additional victims, others such as the unidentified toddler and her mother, or the partial remains of women missing as far back as 1993 still leave room for doubt. Could one man truly account for such a broad and varied timeline? Or does the evidence suggest the possibility of multiple perpetrators, each using the same desolate stretch of land for their own purposes? Then there is the enduring mystery of Shannan Gilbert. It was her disappearance in May 2010 and her chilling 911 call that first brought police to Gilgo Beach. Her body was discovered more than a year later, in December 2011, in a marsh just half a mile from where she vanished. Official reports pointed to accidental drowning, but her family and many advocates remain convinced that she was the victim of foul play. If her death was not connected to the other cases, then why did her final words suggest she was being pursued? And if it was connected, what does that say about the larger story still buried in the sands of Long Island? Finally, the span of years and the differences in victim profiles raise another troubling possibility. Could other perpetrators still be at large? The range of dates from 1993 to 2010 and the mix of victim backgrounds suggest that the Gilgo Beach case may not be the work of a single hand. If that is true, then Heuermann's arrest, while monumental, may only solve part of the mystery. By 2025, the courts may decide the fate of one man. But the unanswered questions surrounding Gilgo Beach ensure that the mystery itself lives on, casting a long shadow over the shoreline, a reminder that even with arrests, indictments, and trials, some truths remain just beyond reach. For more than a decade, the sands of Gilgo Beach have held a story that refused to stay buried. What began with the disappearance of one young woman in 2010 unraveled into a chilling mystery that would span decades, drawing countless investigators, and capture the attention of the entire nation. The arrest of Rex Heuermann in 2023, and the indictments that followed in 2024 and 2025, brought a long-awaited face to the case. Yet even now, the shoreline whispers of questions that have no easy answers. Was this man truly the architect of every tragedy uncovered along Ocean Parkway? Or does the story run deeper, with threads that have yet to be pulled? What really happened to Shannan Gilbert on that dark night in May 2010? And are there still secrets hidden in the marshes and dunes, waiting for the day they will finally come to light? For the families, the pain is as real today as it was when their loved ones first disappeared. For the community, the shadow of Gilgo Beach has forever changed the way they see their home. And for the rest of us, this story is a sobering reminder that even in places of beauty and calm, darkness can linger just beneath the surface. The trial of Rex Heuermann may bring some answers, but the full truth of Gilgo Beach remains unwritten. And until every question is answered, the case will continue to echo through the courts, through the headlines, and through the hearts of those still waiting for justice. If you have found this story compelling and want to follow more mysteries like this, do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep uncovering the stories that matter and ensures you will never miss what comes next.